You ever hear one sentence that changes your entire life? A few careless words that feel like a dagger to the chest? For me, it happened on what was supposed to be a relaxing Sunday afternoon at a pool party with friends and family. The sun was bright, the air smelled of barbecue, kids were splashing in the pool, adults sipping beers and sodas, just your typical suburban weekend scene. I had just come back from the grill, carrying a plate full of burgers, when I heard my wife, Sarah, laughing with her friend Emily. And then she said it, loud enough for me and a few others to catch. "I swear," she chuckled, "I'd trade my husband for that tall guy at the pool." I froze. My grip on the plate tightened. Some people around her laughed, thinking she was joking. But the way she said it, playful, admiring, almost flirty, hit me like a freight train. And then she looked up and saw me standing there. For the briefest second, I saw guilt flash across her face before she forced a laugh and said, "Oh, come on, I'm just kidding." But I knew. Deep down, I knew she wasn't kidding at all. For the rest of the party, I pasted on a smile. I handed out burgers, made small talk, laughed at dumb jokes, but inside I was unraveling. Because that wasn't just a joke. That was a slip. That was the crack in the dam revealing the truth underneath. And truthfully, I'd been noticing things for months. Late nights at work that didn't line up. The way she suddenly cared more about her looks, buying new dresses, hitting the gym more. The way she clutched her phone like it was glued to her hand, smiling at it when she thought I wasn't looking. That night, lying beside her in bed, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, her words looping in my head. I'd trade my husband. Like I was some disposable item she could swap out. My chest tightened thinking, is she already cheating? Is there another man? And then came the scarier thought, what if I never find out? The next morning, over coffee, I tried to test the waters. "So you had fun at the party?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. She scrolled through her phone without looking at me. "Yeah, it was fine. You know, that joke you made." I trailed off. Her eyes snapped up. "What joke?" "You know. About trading me for that guy." She laughed too loudly, fake and forced. "Oh my God, are you seriously still on that?" "Babe, it was just a joke." Everyone was laughing. "Were they?" I asked, looking straight at her. She rolled her eyes. "You're being sensitive. Don't make a big deal out of nothing." And that was it. She shut it down. But the way she got defensive told me more than her words ever could. From then on, I started paying closer attention. I wasn't her husband anymore. I was a detective, and she was my suspect. One night she came home smelling faintly of cologne. Not mine. When I asked, she brushed it off with, "Probably from hugging my coworkers goodbye." But the lie tasted sour in my ears. I could feel it. Flashbacks kept haunting me, back to when we first met. Sarah had this spark, this magnetism. She made me feel like I was the only man who mattered. We married young, dreaming big, swearing to love each other forever. For years I believed her promises. But promises can be broken, and in that moment, it felt like the woman I loved had been slowly slipping away without me even noticing. I knew I couldn't live in denial. I had to know the truth. So one night, while she was in the shower, I picked up her phone. It was locked. Of course it was. But Sarah wasn't as clever as she thought. She used the same 4-digit code for everything, our Netflix, our bank app, and sure enough, it unlocked her phone too. My hands shook as I scrolled through her messages. And there it was. A contact saved under Lisa G. My stomach dropped. Because when I opened it, the messages weren't to Elisa. They were to someone named Eric. And they weren't friendly. They were the kind of messages that made my blood run cold. "Last night was amazing. Can't stop thinking about you. When can I see you again? My husband's getting suspicious." That line shattered me. Because it meant two things: she was cheating, and she knew I was catching on. I sat there, phone in my hand, feeling like my entire world had been set on fire. My first instinct was to storm into the bathroom, shove the phone in her face, and demand answers. But something inside me stopped me. Because if I confronted her now, she'd lie. She'd twist it. She'd make me out to be the jealous, paranoid husband. And I didn't want a screaming match. I wanted justice. So I made a decision right then. If she thought I was a fool, I'd let her keep thinking that. I'd be patient. I'd be smart. And when the time came, my revenge would be something she'd never forget. That was the night everything changed. From that day on, my marriage wasn't really a marriage anymore, it was a game. A silent, dangerous game where every move mattered. Sarah thought she was in control. She thought she could sneak around with Eric, live her double life, and keep me in the dark. But she had no idea. Because I knew. And I was going to make her regret underestimating me. If you're still with me, don't forget to hit that like button. It helps more people find stories like this. And let me ask you, what would you do if you found messages like that on your wife's phone? Would you confront her right away, or play it smart and wait for the right moment? Comment below. I want to hear your thoughts. After that night, I stopped pretending to be oblivious. I went to work in the morning with the same tie, the same smile, but inside I was running 100 different scenarios. I had 2 goals: get proof I could not be accused of inventing, and set the stage so that when I exposed her, it would be clear and final. I wasn't after petty public humiliation for the sake of it. I wanted truth, and if the truth demanded revenge, then so be it. This wasn't just a cheating wife story, it was betrayal and heartbreak dressed up as ordinary life. First, I started small. I learned the routines. Sarah always said she stayed after at the clinic a little later a couple nights a week. She worked as a dental hygienist, but the timestamps didn't add up. I began driving home a few minutes earlier than usual, parking down the street where I could watch the house without being seen. I watched her car pull into the driveway at odd hours. I noted who called and when. The more I watched, the clearer the pattern became. Texts late at night, quick and secretive, then hugs she swore were just goodbyes when friends dropped her off. I set up a folder on my laptop labeled, "Just in case." Ridiculous, right? But I thought about the worst-case scenario: custody fights, lies spun to make me look crazy, people taking her side because no one's perfect, and I wanted to be prepared. I started downloading her calendar snapshots, saving photos, taking screenshots of messages when I could. I kept everything dated, time-stamped. I learned to breathe slow and steady while doing it, because if I acted out of rage I'd ruin the one thing that mattered: irrefutable proof. There were nights I wanted to scream, to throw a plate, to rip her favorite dress to shreds. There were mornings I sat at the kitchen table, coffee gone cold, thinking about the promises we once made. We'd been married 7 years. We'd built a house, rescued a dog named Tucker, and argued over paint colors and baby names. None of that felt like mine anymore. Not completely. That hollow ache in my chest turned into a focus I hadn't felt in years. One Friday, Emily invited us over for game night. I went because I wanted to act normal. Sarah wore a dress that turned heads. That tall guy at the pool, his name was Jason, showed up too. He was taller than me by a few inches, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who walked into a room and somehow all the light went with him. Sarah laughed at his jokes a beat too long. She sat closer on the couch than necessary. I watched them, and she watched me watch them, and it felt like being a ghost in my own life. Later that night, while they played charades, I slipped into the spare room and logged into her email from the browser she'd left open. There it was again, correspondence with an address that used a man's name. The emails weren't crude, not at first, carefully worded, with a sort of hush-hush excitement that's worse than anything vulgar. He called her S. She called him E. And they scheduled meetups like 2 kids plotting to skip class. I printed a few pages and slipped them into my "just in case" folder. I started backing up everything to a flash drive and stashing copies in places she would never think to look. I knew the moment I had to be absolutely sure. Screenshots were one thing, A face-to-face confession or a photo of them together would be better. Over the next 2 weeks I upped my surveillance. I took photos from the car of places she visited, I logged license plate numbers, and I even installed, quietly and legally, a motion-activated camera in the garage, the one place she always said she used to change before heading into work. I felt ridiculous, paranoid, but every time I glanced at the camera's footage and saw nothing but empty daylight, I felt a strange satisfaction. There were times I went too far. I intercepted a package once, thinking maybe he'd mailed her something. It turned out to be a credit card offer. I wanted to feel angry, and instead I felt foolish. I almost told her then, barged into the living room, shoved the envelope at her, and demanded an explanation. Something stopped me. Maybe fear. Maybe the knowledge that evidence, not theatrics, would win. I began leaving little tests around, not to trap her in some manipulative way, but to see how she'd react. A love note with a silly inside joke for the two of us, left on the nightstand. A text from a number she didn't know, to test whether she'd hide her phone. She hid it. She hid it like it would combust if left out, like it was something forbidden and precious. Every concealment was its own confession. At work I smiled and filed paperwork like everything was fine. I took my lunch break at noon like clockwork so she wouldn't catch on. I swapped stories with my buddy Tom, half-true confessions to a friend who suspected nothing of the depth of what I was going through. Tom said things you don't want to hear. Maybe she's just going through something. Maybe she was. Or maybe she was complicit in a pattern of deceit. I wanted to ask Tom if he'd ever felt like someone else was living in his house. I didn't. I couldn't. Then came the night that changed everything. It was late October, and the city smelled like wet leaves and cooling pavement. Sarah texted that she was finishing late. I pretended to be asleep when she came home, but I stayed up waiting. After she walked upstairs and the lights went out, I followed, heart hammering in a way that felt almost violent. The bedroom door closed. She took a shower. I stood at the doorway, listening, trying to make out details through the hum of the bathroom fan. I didn't want to confront her without solid proof. So I did the thing that felt like betrayal to myself. I checked the call logs on our home phone and on her phone from the old backups I had. There was a number repeated like a steady beat. Late calls at 11:42 p.m., 12:15 a.m., 1:03 a.m. Each time I felt the world tilt. I traced the area code, did a reverse lookup using the slow, analog methods, the kind that takes time but gives you facts. The name that came back wasn't Eric. It was Eric Mason. He lived in a neighborhood halfway across town, 2 blocks from a country club where I'd seen him once in a polo shirt, a drink in his hand. I printed his profile picture from a public post, the very same face I'd seen at Emily's game night, only happier, freer, like a man who didn't have to hide his affection. My hands shook when I dialed his number. I wanted to hear his voice, to feel the small relief of knowing he truly existed. Instead, a woman answered, and then silence. I hung up. The act felt petty and juvenile, but the adrenaline lasted for hours. A week later I followed Sarah to a cafe on the outskirts of town. She said she was meeting a client. I parked a few blocks away and watched as she walked in, red lips, a scarf that matched her coat. 10 minutes later a tall man came in. The tall guy from the pool, Jason. They hugged briefly, too briefly, more intimate than friends. Jason sat across and they leaned in close, heads bowed like 2 conspirators. I watched through binoculars, an ugly voyeur with a camera. My phone vibrated, and I snapped a few photos. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow. When I looked at the photos on my phone, the way Jason's hand rested near the small of Sarah's back made my stomach drop. It was a small gesture, one that could be innocent to an outsider. But when you've been lied to and your trust is eroded, nothing is innocent anymore. I took the photos, sent copies to the flash drive, and added another page to my folder with a neat little note. October 23rd, Cafe, 12:14 p.m. Then came the idea that would later be criticized by people who only learn half the story and judge with the luxury of distance. I decided to create a situation where the truth would come out without me looking like a villain. I started a rumor, a controlled, small whisper, that I was thinking about transferring to a new job in another state. Not a real transfer, just a leak. I wanted to see how she reacted. Did she panic? Would she, in some panic-induced honesty, reveal what she was doing? Or would she simply continue, unconcerned, making plans without me? I watched her more closely than ever. There was one night she left the house for what she said was a quick visit to Emily. She barely kissed me, a peck that held no warmth. I texted Emily later, asking if she'd had her that night. Emily answered slowly. She was here briefly, yeah? Then she left. The ellipses felt like collusion. My stomach turned. 2 months in, I had a thick folder, screenshots, photos, email prints, timestamps. I had the cafe photos, the late call logs, and a dozen conversations where Sarah used language I never used with her. I had, in short, enough to make someone stop lying. But I wanted more, a moment, a definitive moment, that couldn't be explained away. I wanted a confrontation that would leave no room for excuses. That's when I thought of confronting Eric directly. I didn't want violence. I wanted a recorded confession. I hired, with my savings, a private investigator for 2 nights, paying in cash because I didn't want any paper trail that would implicate me. The PI was named Luis, a quiet man with tired eyes and a knack for technology. He set up a camera at the back door of a motel in the part of town Eric frequented. He traced Eric's car. He even got license plate reads at a gas station. We watched footage together on a rainy Tuesday. There they were, Sarah and Eric, late at night, getting out of a car behind a strip mall, holding hands at first, then kissing, then entering the cheap motel. I felt sick. The image of them walking into a room together was a blow I could almost not absorb. I rewound it, watched it from different angles, like proof could somehow change the pain into something rational. It didn't. It made it worse. When Luis handed me the flash drive with the motel footage, he told me, "You did the right thing getting this documented. People get gaslit all the time. This is clean." Clean. The words sounded empty. I drove home with the evidence in the glove compartment, and sat in my car for a long time, watching the rain blur the streetlights, my hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only solid thing left. That night I didn't sleep. I played the footage again and again. I thought about calling Sarah on it that very second, waking her and dragging the truth out into the open. But I remembered how quickly she'd laugh off the pool comment and how smoothly she'd lie. No, this had to be done in a way that would make it undeniable to everyone who mattered. If you're listening and you've been through something similar, you probably understand that moment where hurt becomes strategy. I had crossed that line. I started to plan the reveal. I wanted it to be public enough that her denials would look absurd. I also wanted to ensure Jason and Eric and anyone else complicit couldn't rewrite the narrative. I scheduled a dinner party and invited people we both knew, Emily, Tom, some of my coworkers, and her coworkers too. I wanted witnesses. I wanted the truth to land like a stone in a quiet lake and send ripples through every circle that had accepted her lies. But even as I set the trap, I was aware of the cost. Revenge on a cheating spouse can look noble in midnight dramas, but in real life it's complicated. There were so many small, human things at stake: the dog who loved both of us, the photos and frames, the neighbor who asked us to take care of her plant next month. I didn't relish dismantling a life, even if it felt necessary. The weight of forgiveness versus revenge in marriage sat heavy in my chest. I would have to choose, in the end, what kind of man I wanted to be after the truth came out. On the night before the dinner, Sarah came into the bedroom carrying a takeout box and sat on the bed like nothing was wrong. "You okay?" she asked, concern obvious in her voice. That small concerned look ignited rage in me, but I swallowed it. "Yeah," I said simply. "I'll be fine." She put her head on my shoulder, and for a second I almost told her everything. I almost gave her the mercy of honesty and let her explain. Then I pictured the motel footage, the way her eyes had lit up when Eric smiled, and the thought of her making excuses for that image made my hands clench. I kissed her forehead, the way you do to someone you're tired of lying to, and walked out of the room. If you're following this story and you want to see how I exposed everything, and whether I chose cold revenge or a surprising reconciliation, hit subscribe for more real-life cheating stories. Comment below if you think I should have confronted her sooner or handled it differently. I read every comment, and your opinions are part of why I kept going. The next evening, I set the table, lit the candles, and invited the people who mattered. I prepared to pull back the curtain on a secret life that had been growing in plain sight. I told myself I would do it with dignity, with facts, and with a calmness that would leave no room for manipulation. I had no idea how badly I would underestimate the fallout, or how much I would come to learn about love, shame, and the strange, quiet ways people hurt one another. I remember lying awake that night, staring at the ceiling fan spinning above me. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the occasional honk from a car outside. Emily wasn't there. She had left earlier that evening after our explosive confrontation. I had told her I needed time, but the truth was, I didn't know if I wanted her back at all. The weight of betrayal doesn't just sit on your chest, it seeps into your bones. I kept hearing her words from that day at the pool, the careless, cruel way she laughed and said she'd trade me for another man. How could someone who vowed to love me forever throw me away so casually? The next morning, I got a text from Emily. "Can we talk? I'll come by after work." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I spent the day reflecting on everything: our marriage, our years together, the little lies I'd missed, and the enormous truth I'd finally uncovered. And I also thought about what my revenge really meant. Was it about hurting her back? Or was it about reclaiming my own dignity, my peace? When she arrived that evening, she looked drained. Her eyes were red, her hair pulled back messily, her once confident stride replaced by nervous hesitations. She sat down on the couch across from me, hands trembling slightly. "David, I messed up," she whispered. "No," I replied firmly. "You didn't just mess up. You shattered everything." Tears welled in her eyes as she tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled it back. "I need you to be honest with me, Emily. Not half-truths. Not excuses. Everything." And she did. Slowly, painfully, she confessed. The flirtations at work that had turned into emotional cheating long before I suspected anything. The late-night business trips that were really hotel meetups. The constant thrill she sought outside our marriage because she felt trapped in routine. It was like being stabbed repeatedly, but I forced myself to listen. Because sometimes, the only way to heal is to face the whole, ugly truth. When she finished, she was sobbing. "I ruined us. I know I did. But please, David, don't let this be the end. I'll do anything to make it right. Counseling, therapy, whatever you want. I don't want to lose you." I sat there in silence for what felt like hours. Inside, a war raged. One part of me remembered the laughter, the love, the years we built together. The other part remembered the betrayal, the heartbreak, and the humiliation. Finally, I spoke. "Emily, you didn't just cheat on me. You made me feel like I wasn't enough. And that's something I'll carry for the rest of my life. You asked me at the pool, jokingly, if I'd trade places with that tall guy. But the truth is, you traded me a long time ago. I just didn't know it." She broke down completely, and I knew in that moment, whether I forgave her or not, things would never be the same. For weeks afterward, we lived separately. She sent me long texts, letters, even showed up at my work once begging for another chance. Friends and family had their opinions. Some told me forgiveness was noble, others said revenge or divorce was the only way. And here's where my so-called epic revenge came into play. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, deliberate, and powerful. I chose myself. I filed for divorce. When I handed her the papers, she collapsed into tears, begging me to reconsider. But I stood firm. My revenge wasn't about destroying her life. It was about refusing to let her destroy mine any further. She wanted excitement, freedom, and something new. She could have it. But she wouldn't have me. In the courtroom months later, as the judge finalized our separation, I felt a strange calmness. A freedom I hadn't felt in years. Betrayal had broken me, yes, but surviving it, and walking away, rebuilt me stronger. Now, looking back, I see it as a painful but necessary chapter of my life. My story isn't just a cheating wife story. It's a story about betrayal and heartbreak, yes, but also about strength, resilience, and choosing dignity over destruction. And here's what I want anyone listening to take away. When faced with a broken marriage drama, when you're standing at the crossroads of forgiveness versus revenge in marriage, always choose the path that gives you peace. Because peace is the real victory. If you're still here, listening to my story, don't forget to like this video. It helps more people hear these real-life cheating stories, and maybe find the courage they need. And comment below, what would you have done in my place? Forgiveness? Or the kind of quiet revenge I chose? Subscribe for more emotional relationship stories, filled with lessons about love, betrayal, and healing. As for me, life didn't end with Emily's betrayal. It began again. And this time, I was finally free.